Decades ago, it used to be one or two a season would happen. Now with climate change and these extreme warm waters, it's almost, it's happening all the time.
This storm, in a way, is kind of bad news for the people that are still trying to deny climate change as a factor.
Florida Republicans deny climate change as a monster storm barrels towards the coast.
This will be a first-time test for how you adapt to these new, stronger storms on a warmer planet as a result of climate change.
The threat exacerbated, of course, by climate change.
Charleston, like Miami, gets water that comes up on a good sunny day. That's climate change because water levels are rising.
Our Earth is getting warmer, and there is just no doubt, I think, left that it is feeding these beasts.
Oh my God, super scary. Oh my God, the storms are coming, and it's all our fault. It's all because of climate change. Hi, everybody. Auntie speaks here. Anybody who's been watching a lot of my stuff, which isn't a lot of you, knows that I love researching climate change. And here we have a perfect example of a terrible thing happening down in the South, in Florida, and up the East Coast, where we have a terrible hurricane. Hurricanes have been around forever. But now every time that we have a hurricane, all of the quote unquote talking heads come out and say that this was the worst storm ever and we're going to have more worse storms because of climate change. It's rather goofy. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the science, and hopefully I won't bore all you guys, and hopefully you'll like some of this information and you can pass it on to other people. So the question is, put a comment down below. Do you believe that climate change is increasing the extent, severity, and the number of storms? Do you think that? So comment below. Let's look at our first chart. Okay, so what do we got? We have a chart from the EPA, so the government, so very trusted source, right? Completely trustworthy. And what are we measuring? We are measuring North Atlantic tropical cyclone activity. It looks like the number of cyclones and the strength. Hey, if you look at this chart, this looks a little scary. Maybe there is a trend. Maybe climate change is increasing cyclone activity, hurricane activity. But you know what? I'm not sure about that. So let's listen to a scientist talk about why this chart is maybe a little funny.
And this is based on the Atlantic multidecadal mode. This is a paper I wrote in the Journal of Science with Dr. Chris Lancy. Dr. Bill Gray was co-authors with that. And you can see we trace it all the way back to 1870, where we have this particular mode of oceanic temperatures. It's not just the ocean temperatures. It's this mode of temperatures where high activity, low activity, et cetera. But let's see, there we go. And by the way, those increases are huge for the high activity versus the low activity. I'm not going to spend time on this, but this is no little signal. This is incredibly robust. That's why when it hit with a roar in 1995, like Neil said, we had never observed this on satellite, the high activity era like that. But what if you take this chart and you skip the beginning, which studies have done? And they justify saying, well, we only want to start with the satellite data. Well, then you miss the beginning, so you end up with the trend.
Very interesting, isn't it? Yes. So if you didn't know, hurricanes are cyclical, just like a lot of things in our environment. That's why it's really, really dangerous whenever you hear someone say, this is the hottest year on record, because everything runs in cycles. A lot of it has to do with ocean currents. They run on 100-year cycles. Some of them have, 1,000-year cycles in the oceans, and literally the ocean completely flips over, and cold becomes hot and hot becomes cold, and that creates different weather. So we've known for a very, very long time that hurricanes run on this almost like 10-year cycle, where you'll have 10 years with almost no hurricanes, and then you'll have 10 years with lots of hurricanes. And we've known this for years. So what happens if you have the government who knows this, takes a chart and cuts off that chart and starts it during a low season? It's going to show you a trend. Isn't that amazing how that works? They did the same thing with fires. Fires in like the 1800s were like super, super huge. Like what we have now is nothing even compared. So the government like cut off the chart and started it like in the present day. Okay, so this is what the government does. The so-called scientists who are supposed to be honest with you, they take a chart and they cut it off during a low area to show you a trend which should not be there.
And he looks just at the measures of max wind speed, no trend. Category 1s, 2s, no trend. Category 4s and 5s, huge trend. But the problem is that double. So this was a big headline. This was the Journal of Science, which I had published in, and you sat there and first of all, just because it's in the literature doesn't make it true. And he was challenged by tons of scientists. I mean, we got so upset because how they looked at the database. The least reliable measure was the Cat 4s and 5s, because until 1988, we didn't have the Dvorak technique.
The most unreliable data that we have is Cat 4 and 5. Why is he saying this? Well, this was a really long talk, and I didn't want to bore you because he talks a lot about science. So I don't know if you know, but we have computers now. We have airplanes. We have very sophisticated satellite equipment which measure wind speed. We even have planes that fly right through the hurricane, and they drop these little meters and they radio back the wind speed. Okay, so that allows us to take very, very accurate measurements. Measurements which we have now, which we did not in the past. Okay, so a category 4 or 5 now we can measure, because a lot of the category 4 and 5s don't even touch land. They weaken when they get to land. That's why you hear all these scary stories all the time. It's like, oh my God, it's category 4, it's category 5. And many, many times I would hazard to guess, and I probably shouldn't say this, most of the time it loses strength slightly when it gets to land. Okay, so what he means by we don't have good data is because before 1988, we didn't even have the wind measurements that we do now. So we're much more sensitive to category 4s and 5s, where before 1988, we didn't have those measurements. So we didn't have, quote unquote, as many 4 and 5s. Well, we actually did. We just didn't have the equipment to measure them. And it gets even worse.
But he did this phenomenal chart in EOS. And what it shows is the percent of the tropical cyclones striking land in the Atlantic. So what you have is, in the first part, look at all the years where 100% of the ones in the database struck land. In other words, if it didn't strike land, they didn't know about them. And then as soon as you hit recon, much fewer of these 100%, but as soon as you get satellite, never again. And hardly ever even coming near 75%. Recently, definitely not. Why? Because now we see the stuff that's out there. This is huge. And there's people, scientists, that simply don't know this stuff.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? We see hurricanes out in the middle of the ocean, and it's counted as a hurricane on that year. What did they do back in the 1850s, the 1900s, 2020, 2040, 2050? Unless it hit land, it wasn't counted. So almost 100% of the hurricanes counted before satellites, which is basically 1980, late 70s. Pretty much the only ones that were counted were the ones that hit land, or if a boat passed by it or something like that, or around it, they might count it as well. That's why you saw 75% in some years, because we had more boats. And so some boats saw them, even though they didn't hit land. So when you're talking about science, you need to look at how data is gathered. Okay? You need to look at how data is gathered. So we've got a really great example here of someone who saw that all the data was messed up, and so he did his own data.
Then Dr. Lancey also did this, where he looked at the trend in tropical storm and hurricane numbers over a century, and you see there's a trend there, but how were we measuring back then? And many of those short-lived storms that Neil talks about, we weren't observing, you add those in, you figure out a way to add those in or take them out of the recent time, and you end up with no trend at all.
Statistically, no trend. So here's the chart that Dr. Lancey put together. And you can see by this chart that there is no trend. Okay? How do they do this? Well, they can statistically estimate by how many hurricanes don't hit landfall right now. You hear about them all the time. Huge storm, huge hurricane, and then all of a sudden it goes poof, and it's gone. So they can take that and use statistics to fill in the blank of what we didn't know in the past. Now, it's not perfect. Could be a lot more than what's on this chart, or it could be a lot less. Okay? But I don't think anybody could say that it was 2 times or 3 times more now. Even that there's statistically a trend, since we do not have measurements in the past. So who are these guys? Okay, so Dr. Lancey is an American meteorologist. Sorry, I'm having a problem spitting that out. Hurricane Research Division of the Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory at NOAA. Those are the guys who measure everything. Okay, so he's not a kook. And now the Science and Operations Officer at the National Hurricane Center. Okay, so this is not like some Yahoo. Okay, and Stanley Goldenberg, he's crazy. He's not a doctor. He has been jumping into hurricanes for like ever. Not jumping in, but he takes planes through them, and he's been doing that for something like 20 years or something like that, where literally they take these huge government jets and they like put them right through the eye of the hurricane. But you know, these people might just be lying. So let's look at something where you cannot say that I am BSing you, right? How about we look at the IPCC? What do they say about climate change and hurricane? Okay, guys, what do we got here? So the IPCC. So you can't say that I'm cherry picking anything. Changes in climate extremes and their impacts on the natural physical environment. So let's get right to it. Tropical cyclones, here we go. And extra tropical cyclones. Okay, I'm not quite sure what the difference between the two is, so sorry about that. So low confidence that any observed long-term increases in tropical cyclone activity are robust after accounting for past changes in observing capabilities. What does IPCC mean by low confidence? It means that it's BS, okay? Even stuff that they don't have confidence on, they put high confidence or they put medium. If it says low confidence, that basically means there is no evidence. There is no evidence at all. And then extra tropical cyclones, likely polar shiftward and extratropical cyclones. I don't know what that means. Okay. Attribution of observed changes. So low confidence in attribution of any detectable changes in tropical cyclone activity to anthropogenic influences. That means man-made climate change. Projected changes, likely decrease or no change in frequency of tropical cyclones, likely increase in mean maximum wind speed, but possible not in all basins. So basically, there is no evidence. We don't have any. There might be some in the future. I consider myself, I don't know if I consider myself a scientist, but I study a lot, okay? So if even the IPCC tells you something, then you just need to give up the ghost. And you need to stop letting Democrats use this as an issue. You need to pull this out of the IPCC when you're on the news, Republicans, and say, hey, even the IPCC says that there's no evidence. Why do you keep saying that there's evidence? Hello? Okay, guys. So I thought this was topical. My heart goes out to everybody in the hurricanes. I hope everybody is okay, and I hope this goes away quickly, and I hope we have a really short hurricane season. So please send this out to people. Okay, we need to stop using every storm that comes through saying that climate change is going to kill us all. Okay, we need to start speaking in science. If someone scares you and says the world is ending, then they're not a scientist. We'll see you on the next one.